place where we collect stories and circulate life-changing wisdom. I'm your host, Asher, and my co-host today is Queen Lav. And our two guests today is Brenda and Jeffrey. And today we get to talk about our theme of the day, which is around failures. And we get to share in the experiences of Brenda and Jeffrey and Lavinia's, their failures, their stories that have transformed their life. And you guys get to just listen in and see whether or not that can improve your life. But if you guys are catching us on live, go ahead and put hashtag live in the chat in the comment section. Let us know you're hearing us. And go ahead and put, if you're catching us on replay, go ahead and put hashtag replay in the chat. Let us know that you're catching us there as well. So we're gonna start with you, Brenda, if you don't mind. Just share us, tell us a bit about yourself, who you've been a hero to, what you specialize in, and how you adding value to the world.
Sure, absolutely. So I started off as a social worker. I'm now a holistic nutritionist. And the area that I specialize in is analyzing and interpreting raw genetic data. So genetic profiles that people get from 23andMe or Ancestry or whatever, and use those actually deep diving into their genes to personalize holistic wellness programs for them. So that's my latest thing. My kids joke that I've never been cutting edge in my life, and this might actually be the time I am. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Jeffrey, what about you, sir?
Yeah, so my name's Jeffrey Deskovic, and I run a nonprofit agency, and we free people who are wrongfully imprisoned, and we pursue policy changes aimed at preventing those injustices from happening in the first place. So far, we've been able to free 14 people. We helped pass 3 laws and then another 6 as part of members of a national coalition group called It Could Happen to You. I'm the founder and the director of the organization. And at some point, I became tired of sitting in the front row of the courtroom, even though the lawyer there might be my employee or that, I might have worked on the case, and hence going to law school and, becoming an attorney. So I specialize in wrongful conviction in general, with a definite secondary interest in justice reform. And lastly, I got into the advocacy work. I spent 16 years in prison myself before I was exonerated through DNA testing, which established my innocence, and hence devoting my life to freeing people in the same position and working on the preventative side.
Oh, wow.
Wow,
I have
that was so
goosebumps,
much.
Jeffrey. Thank you
Mm.
for doing that. Wow. And
And,
thank
and
you, Brenda, for doing what you're doing. That's very interesting. I
Can I
never
ask
thought.
you, did you know there was a DNA link between these two
no,
guests?
it just showed up. So I will let you ask Jeffrey a question there, Brenda. I know you're curious about you guys' connection. I was like, wow. Mm.
It's fascinating, Jeffrey, because obviously I don't know how long ago that was, but even the human
Well,
genome's only been mapped for 20 years. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
sure. So, well, just so I was exonerated 18 years ago. My case originally happened in 1990. The DNA actually excluded me before the trial. That information was in front of the jury, but I was convicted anyway. And how I was exonerated is that the DNA technology was advanced. The DNA data
Right.
bank was created. And so we went from being able to say, not only is it not me, but it was him.
Right, exactly. Okay. Oh, that's fascinating. We'll have to chat later, Jeffrey. I love that.
Yes, we do. It's interesting.
Thank you.
Wow. So Jeffrey, let's start with you then. So talk about your biggest failure, the one that really transformed your life. Share that story with us a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I would say so when I finally got compensated, which took about 5 years, I used some of the money to start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. I had been an individual advocate for 5 years after I was released. I was speaking, I was meeting with elected officials, I was trading privacy for awareness, and became a weekly columnist. But I wasn't really able to take part in freeing people, hence committing some of the compensation to start the organization to continue those things, but have the exonerative component, which obviously is something I couldn't have done on my own as individual advocate. So I think that one of my biggest failures with the organization is that, I was only thinking about the services part of it. Okay. So I had this idea, so I committed $1.5 million of my own money. And I thought that I could just have the services, have employees to oversee the services, and I could meet with the potential donors. It's my name on the door. I'm not getting paid from it. In fact, it cost me money to launch. So who could question our authenticity? and I would just take meetings with donors, and everything would be great. But a funny thing happened on the way to the bank.
Mm.
So if I could do it all over again, what I would have done is I just would have put a limited amount of money just as far as development, to have somebody working full time in fundraising, and somebody who was an executive director, and build out the program staff as funds, public support came in, that would allow that to happen in a sustainable way. So I would consider that to be one failure that I learned from.
Mm. So you're saying that your biggest failure is the way you approach setting up your organization and the way the employment process was set up and those.
Yeah,
So,
yes, I should have put money just into development instead of just hiring, lawyers, paralegals, and
mm,
investigator. I was just thinking about working on the cases. I wasn't thinking about, I really should put money into raising money from the public and then hire those positions from that, so that it's happening, the growth of the organization is happening in an organic way rather than just my artificially stepping on the gas.
How did you
okay.
recover from that, Jeffrey?
Yeah, so about after about close to 3 years, I mean, I had to fire all the employees and let them go. I couldn't just keep writing checks, large checks every month. And I'm probably too empathetic a guy, and that was not an easy process for me. So how I recovered is I had to let everybody go to stop the bleeding. I converted the organization into a volunteer entity, and then as we started raising money, I was starting to build back. I was starting to, I was able to start building back. So I have a part-time office administrator. I have somebody that works in policy that doubles to help me as a fundraising person. And I recently added a paralegal. So that was a big part of the recovery. And then also, I got rid of the board. See, that was another mistake that I made, that I think people could take a learning from, is a board member is supposed to be able to, first of all, give or get a certain amount of money every year that they're either going to write a check for, or that they're going to go out and get it for you. They're supposed to introduce you to at least 4 or 5 people in their network that have capacity that the cause is likely to speak to. There's supposed to be a credibility transference. They're supposed to be able to give advice, and they're supposed to help to carry out the organization's mission in one way or another, albeit from 100,000 feet away, big picture, not day to day. Okay, I didn't pick board members that had those characteristics. I just picked people that were true believers that weren't able to help me anything. And I think that had a lot to do with why I wasn't able to raise the money that I needed at the time. Then I went through a second set of board members that they had all types of credentials, but they just blew smoke and ultimately did nothing. And I got rid of them. I'm on my third iteration of people that are actually able to help. And I also have an advisory board, which is, separate from the board. So and they're able to help with different things. And I didn't have the right promotional material either. Like I didn't, like, now we have a flyer. I have bios of, board, advisory board, myself, my policy director. We have a document called Critical Points of Progress. So all the highlights of our accomplishments, we have that. We have another document, outcomes, we call it. And so, we have all the components listed out, all the different positions that we need priced out according to nonprofit standards. And then we have metrics that people can measure us by. Well, if you were willing to help fund us, this is what, if we were really armed for bear, these are the metrics. Here's how many states we could work on doing policy in. Here's how many cases we could screen. From there, this would make it to stage 2. Then from there, a certain amount that we could do field investigation. We could expect to get to court with this number, and we could expect to ultimately free this other number of people. So I didn't have that material either. So I think I didn't have enough people with experience around me either, whereas I have that now.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Brenda,
Oh,
curious about you.
yes,
Well,
go ahead. Brenda, please.
We're gonna
Have
go
you worked
from
have you worked in any nonprofits, Brenda? Have you worked in any nonprofits since you?
actually, totally. My husband and I co-led a faith community for 20 years. So we did nonprofit charitable status. He worked for a large international justice organization for years. So we have been involved in nonprofits for a long time, which is why I was nodding when
Mhm.
Jeffrey was talking about the board and getting the parameters set up and all that kind of stuff. Been there, done that the hard way and easier way, Jeffrey. My failures are going to be just microscopic ones now, though, compared to Jeffrey's, because he's talking macro, big picture organization. I would say my biggest failure that has now impacted what I'm doing was trusting other people with my wellness. So believing that other people care about as much as me being well, body, mind, and spirit as I do. And I think that's a very common, I like to think it's a common failure. A lot of my clients have it. I think it's common in North America, Europe, where we really trust experts around us, which to some degree we need to do, but we can not realize that we're really making some mistakes in the decisions that we're making. And I think my fork in the road came, this is going to date me, okay, but about 40 years ago, as a social worker, loving my job, working with really challenging adolescents, supervisor of a locked, a contained unit, just really, really loving that job and being stressed to the max, like having lots of meetings with Attorney General Department, with health, with ministries, with social services, education, coming home, falling asleep on the couch at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right after work. And I remember a turning point came when a friend of mine said to me, okay, something is wrong with you. Like, you're tired all the time. You don't do stuff with us anymore. You're not very fun. And she said, frankly, I think you used to be smarter. And I was like, thank you very much. I am 25. What is this, the end of my life right now, And it was like a big fork in the road. She said, what you're doing is not working. And what I was doing was living on sugar, government issued coffee, like just, not doing any of the things that I now know are the things that you need to do to foster metabolic health, foster wellness, etc. So she said, so that was my big failure. My big risk was, she said, I think you need to go see my boyfriend. I'm like, who the heck is your boyfriend? And she says, well, he's really smart. He's a member of Mensa. He does, supplement formulations for all these big vitamin companies in Canada. And she said, he's actually a master herbalist. The guy is really cool. And I just went, like, run away. You are the opposite of what I would be going to go see. But I was desperate. Like, everything she said was right. Like, I was exhausted, anxious, depressed. I had an ulcer. My goodness. Like, I'm like, what the heck? So I went to see him, and I would say my biggest failure got shifted to where I came home from meeting this very interesting, unique guy. And I said to my husband, okay, I don't care what you do. I'm, for the rest of my life, going to do it this. No, I'm going to do it for 2 weeks. And then when it doesn't work, I'm going back to Nanaimo bars and peak greens and coffee. But after 2 weeks, I said to my husband, I don't care what you do the rest of your life. I am going to do some variation of this way of taking care of my body, mind, and spirit, because I feel like I just got my life back. Well, I'm not getting my life back. I never had a life like this before. I am going to move forward to this. So big failure, handing off my wellness to different people, to taking back that authority and that in my hands, and still seeing obviously experts on the full spectrum, traditional doctors, NDs, the whole 9 yards, but realizing that I really needed to learn more about this, study about this, get trained in this, and be able to take care of myself and our subsequent, as it turned out, 5 kids, 6 grandkids, all those kinds of things, So yeah, it's a kind of a thing where you hit the wall and either it's going to be downhill from here or you're going to do something different and make some changes. And that became then my life. I write about that. I teach about that, study epigenetics, the way that environment impacts your genes because of that. So yeah, that's how I ended up in this spot.
Oh, I love it. I love how you both are helping people, and that happened after a low turning point for both of you.
Mhm.
It's impressive.
Mhm.
So, Brenda, thank you for sharing with us your failure that became very successful, turned into a success. So right now you are helping your clients to learn how to eat for their genetic makeup.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the whole field of epigenetics. It'll be interesting to find out how much Jeffrey has progressed in on this field as it has blown up once he got exonerated. But basically, the field of epigenetics simply means what is above our genetics. So when we do a genetics test, 23andMe, or like a swab to see if your DNA is a part of a crime scene or whatever, that is your gene. That is the strand of DNA you got from your biological mom and the strand of DNA you got from your biological dad. So that is what makes you. The field of epigenetics is relatively new exploration of what are what's the environment. And by that, I mean, what are the things that you take in and you eat, how much sleep you get, how you manage your stress, what kind of supplements you use, how you exercise, and your environment. So pollution, stress, you're in a hard, difficult job or a relationship. What's your understanding of relationship to self and to others? We now know that childhood trauma plays a significant role in the way our genes are expressed. So it's not that epigenetics or you eating better or you doing the right kind of exercise is going to change your genes. Like if you have a coding, say it's a T and an A, there's only four letters in the alphabet for genes, so it's pretty easy. But say you got a T from one parent and an A from the other, nothing you do is going to change your T and your A. But what happens, either if it's a beneficial gene coding, helps you, for example, manage stress well. You don't get stuck in fight or flight mode. Then you can eat and take care of yourself in ways that allows that gene to be expressed. And if you have a really challenging gene with that, one of the ones is called an FKBP5. I have that red, got the poor coding from each of my folks. Then I have learned the things to do to actually keep that gene from being able to express itself. So you can't change your genes, but you can, through the work that you do, the decisions you make every day, alter the way that those genes are expressed. So that is very empowering for people who feel like, oh, everyone in my family has got type 2 diabetes, or no one in my family is athletic, or everyone in my family has trouble with sleeping, or we're all nervous wrecks, or whatever. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, there's a lot of things that are external that you have control over, that you can actually impact how those, expressions would happen. So it's quite hopeful for people to see that they can make some changes that will have some differences.
That's great. Hey, Jeffrey, I'm really curious. Do you have the results of your DNA, or that was with the court and you don't have that? Do you have your own results?
No, that was
Yeah.
no, that was
Because I
no,
was
'cause
thinking you
that's
could share it with Brenda and find out.
I
Yeah.
mean, look, I have heard of what Brenda's, spoken about before. You give a DNA swab and they have an analysis and they look, these types of food you're supposed to stay away from. These are good for you, and that can have an impact on in terms of your body weight and other health things pertaining to that. I have heard of that.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet, but I do want to do that in the future. I've had I've had personal trainer who was a nutritionist as well,
Right.
and so that was a whole educational process there in terms of eating clean, minimizing the carbs, and even some things that were the average person wouldn't have thought of. Like, I mean, she said, look, if you want to have fruit, then you eat a piece of fruit. It's the amount of sugar. If you don't drink your fruit through the juice, because there's so much sugar in that. You think
Yeah.
that you're really helping yourself, but you're not. The amount of sugar is overpowers the benefit. So even just in terms of that, and eating, like I eat like 4 or 5 times a day, but a small portion, rather than a larger meal, because it gives your body more time, to burn it up. And not eating past the 8 p.m. is another thing. And having a nice meal and going to sleep, not a very good thing to do to yourself. So I have implemented those things, and I do feel a lot more healthy about it. And even just in terms of making my own salad dressings with lemon and garlic and stuff like that, as opposed to the store-bought salad dressings, which have a high fat count in it. So those things I feel like has helped me get to a better place as well.
That's good. Now, what's interesting, Jeffrey, and we can talk about court and DNA and justice and whatever, but what we're finding now is that, like I'm all for homemade salad dressings. I was going to give you actually applause for that, okay? But I actually have clients who have a much higher need for, say, fat. And I think this is the thing which is so fascinating about this is, everyone's on the keto bandwagon, everyone's on a paleo bandwagon, everyone's on low carb this, and my clients are just like confused. They're like, they feel like there's this massive wellness jungle and they're trying to cut through it with a plastic takeout spoon, and it's just like, that's why it's so fun when I get back, DNA and I run it through some of the software that I'm trained in using, and we can go, actually, you would be great on a ketogenic approach. You're kind of part Neanderthal, like you skipped the agrarian, 10,000 years that we've been growing grains, and your gut still thinks that you live in this era. You need a much higher percentage of saturated fat, for example. You have people like me who would probably kill themselves cardiovascularly on a ketogenic diet, but you just start to learn those things. And it's so freeing, instead of wondering every week, oh, my buddy's doing this, or my friend is doing HIIT, high intensity interval training, and man, maybe that's what I should do. But every time I do it, like, I'm so sore, and I'm like, yeah, I just looked at your genes and you actually don't produce enough collagen, and that's horrible for you. So you are actually able to fine tune it, and people can just quit worrying then for the rest of their life about the latest, greatest, whatever. It's very freeing. It's very, very freeing. Okay. You never have to buy another diet book or another X magazine or whatever. So that's kind of fun.
Wow, thank you both. Jeffrey, I do have one more question, and I'll let you, Asher, continue with the questions. So this is a very broad topic episode, but it's interesting. Jeffrey, I wanted to ask you, how do you select or accept your clients? What's the criteria?
That's a great question. So we collect certain limited legal documents. So we have a questionnaire that we have people fill out, and then we ask them for the direct appeal brief. So because that has a factual section in the front, and so we it's better to read 10 to 30 pages that lawyer from both sides on the facts, rather than getting into 1,000 or several thousand page transcript. And then we get the police reports and lab reports, if any. And so once we have that, then there is something actually to analyze, and we ask ourselves two questions. Number one, do we believe the innocence claim? And our internal standard is it at least plausible what somebody is saying, based upon, something that's objective, something that can be articulated. And part of that too is the analysis. We look at what was actually used as evidence. So there's been more than 3,500 people since 1991 that have been exonerated across the United States, and a percentage of them are DNA exoneration. So basically, we have a unassailable pile of data, cases that we know that innocent people are found guilty and proven innocent. There are patterns in those cases. So there's patterns in the DNA cases. So when we look at what was used as evidence, like if there's identification, well, are there discrepancies between what the defendant looks like versus the description that was initially given? I mean, some people have been convicted where the ethnicity was wrong, or the race is wrong. Somebody describes somebody Spanish committing a crime, and it's a Black defendant, got the race wrong, or get the big discrepancies in height or in weight. If the length of viewing, if it's a distance. So if somebody wears glasses and it's 400 or 500 feet away, and they wake up in the middle of the night, and without putting on their glasses, they claim that they saw somebody. Well, those are all patterns and cases, just using that as an example of misidentification. So we know what the patterns are, that an identification may be mistaken, that a confession could be coerced or false, or that our informant is lying. So we look at the presence of those red flags and the evidence that's used. So that all ties into, do we believe the innocence claim? And the second question is, do we see a potential route for victory? So looking at the record, that might be why we accept the case, that we believe an innocence claim, but that's not how we're going to win the case. The court's not going to allow you to relitigate the case. You have to look for something new. So we look and see what is the potential route. So if it's DNA, that's kind of obvious. So that would be something like, is there blood? Is there seminal fluid? Is there hair? Is there a piece of clothing that somebody sweated into? As an example. So that's in the DNA case, but that's only available in 10% of all serious felony cases. So in a non-DNA case, we would look for, is there an alternative suspect? Are there similar crimes in nearby areas? We might file a Freedom of Information law request, and documents that were supposed to have been turned over sometimes bubble to the surface. So that could give you a new investigative lead. If we think one of the witnesses was lying, we would do a re-interview. Sometimes witnesses bubble to the surface that weren't known before, so we would interview them. So those are all line of investigations. Those all tie into, is there a potential way to prove it? So we look at, after we identify every potential line, we ask ourselves, well, assuming these all broke right for an applicant, would that be enough to overturn a conviction? Would it be that if this was known before, would that probably have led to a different outcome? Because that's the standard the court is going to look at it. And then we'll also ask ourselves, well, what are the odds are that this is going to break right? How much time and money is it actually going to take to run down all of these things? And only if we can check both of those boxes, yes, we believe in the innocence claim, yes, we see a potential route to victory, only then would we accept the case. And then that's when the actual work on the case starts.
Well, does it matter the degree of the felony?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, with the caveat that, I mean, if somebody is convicted of a misdemeanor where it's like 1 year or less, we're not going to take a case like that, because, there's people that are facing much more serious consequences than that. So we don't really have the luxury of, taking a case that way. But beyond that, no, it doesn't matter the degree of the felony beyond that.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I am listening, and I see so much passion in the way you share your story there, Jeffrey. And who better than you to stand in front of the court and to defend somebody that been through some of what you've been through. So I definitely want to congratulate you and just kind of recognize you for definitely putting in the work.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this guy, you passionate about this. And if you don't mind sharing, I would love to find out, like, what was the circumstance of your case, or what was your situation that you ended up in
Sure.
jail for, if you don't mind sharing that.
No, I definitely don't mind sharing that at all. No. So the year was 1990. I was in Peekskill, which was in Westchester County, New York. So it's the suburbs. I'm a high school sophomore. The victim, who was murdered and raped, she was in 2 of my classes as a freshman, 1 as a sophomore. I knew her name and she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high-buy basis. I didn't think of it this way then, but I realized in hindsight that, I really kind of lived a double life. There was my life after school and there was my life in school. After school, I was really popular in the apartment complex that I live. And in general, whatever I suggested would usually be what we would do. We're going to play Monopoly, we're going to basketball, stickball, football, whatever it is we're going to play. But that was not my life in school. There, the kids were a little bit older than me. I really wasn't into going to parties, drinking, chasing girls. So I was kind of like on the outskirts of the society in the high school. And so the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them told the police, well, they might want to talk to me because I was quiet, so I didn't quite fit in. So that's how I got on the police radar. I was also a sensitive teenager. This was my first real brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction. And the police thought, well, that's suspicious that my reaction was some sort of outward sign of uh, being guilty, being sorry for what I did. You know, why are you upset and you barely knew the. So that's how I got on the police radar. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would talk to me like a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend that like they needed my help to solve the crime. So, and they would push too hard, and I would get scared. I'd want to get away from them. And then Jeff, as this junior detective helper theme was developed. So prior to being a teenager, I wanted to be a cop when I grew up, and somehow or another they learned that. And so they would say things like, well, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. So let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any capacity. And that intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique, where one officer was pretending to be my friend. In time, I began to look at him as a father figure. So that went on for 6 weeks. My mother had no idea. And so eventually the cops got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They said, we got some new information in the file, and we want to share that with you. And that's going to allow you to be even more helpful to us. First, though, we want you to take and pass the lie detector test. So the next day, rather than going to the school, I went to the police station for the test. As I mentioned, it was a school day. And so my mother and grandmother thought that I was in school. They didn't have any idea that anything was wrong. So therefore, they did not call around looking for me. They drove me 40 minutes away by car to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County, whereas I was a native of Peekskill in Westchester County. And so that meant I had no way of leaving on my own. I was totally dependent upon the police. So there were 3 cops that came there with me from Peekskill. They put me in the car by myself with the officer who was pretending to be my friend. They drove me to Brewster. The polygraphist was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. He was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. They gave me a 4-page brochure, which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't quite understand. But then I figured, well, I'm here to help the police, so it doesn't matter. Let's just get on with it. From there, they put me in a small room. He gave me countless cups of coffee. I really wasn't a coffee drinker at 16. Then he literally wired me up to the machine, and he launched into his 3rd-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He got in my face. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And as each hour is passing by, my fear is increasing in proportion to the time. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours.
Wow.
Towards the end, he said, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear through the roof. And then the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and said, look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do this any longer. You have to help yourself. Look, just.
And you, what age were you at the time, you said?
I'm 16. I'm 16.
16. Mm.
And he said, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else knew either loomed quite large in my mind. And there was this possibility of harm he threw in the air and this false life preserver. So I made up a story based on the information they gave me that day and the 6 weeks run up to it. By the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position. I was crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. The interrogation was not videotaped. It was not audio taped. There's no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And when they came to court, they left a threatened false promise out of their testimony. So that was how I was arrested. Now, in terms of how I was convicted, I mean, it was the testimony, the confession is what it was. But then the DNA didn't matter. Got the medical examiner to commit fraud. This medical examiner after the DNA didn't match me, he came to court and he said, and this is 6 months after the autopsy, 6 months after the written notes and everything. He said, I remember that I forgot to document medical findings, which he claimed showed that the victim had been promiscuous. That's how the prosecutor then used that to argue, well, that was how the DNA didn't match me, and yet you were guilty. She was sleeping around. Matter of fact, she slept with somebody before you murdered and raped her. And then he took it to the next level by mentioning another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim. But he never got a DNA sample from this other youth. He never called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury, and the public defender that I had essentially didn't defend me. He let him get away with that. He literally asked no questions to the medical examiner. He didn't interview my alibi. He didn't explain to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession. He should have never represented me, because this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender office, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. It prevented the defense from asking him for a sample. And as an end result of everything, I was wrongfully convicted and, given a 15 to life sentence and sent to a maximum security prison, where I lost 7 appeals. I got turned down for parole before ultimately being exonerated through the further testing through the data bank.
Wow. You came a long way, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
You came a long way, man.
I did. I came from, to survive from 17 to 32. And I made use of my time while I was in prison. I got the GED, the associates, a year towards the bachelor before funding was cut. I took different trades. I learned the law. I read 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week from 98 to 2006. So I didn't waste my time. And I was fortunate when I came home, I was able to be given a scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's. I got the master's. I started the foundation. I went to law school. So it's been a long time.
How many years you were in prison?
16 years, from 17, from age 17 to 32.
Well, I heard you that, but I kind of didn't want to accept.
Right.
I guess my brain didn't want to accept that.
I understand. But I think that, I think looking back on, just tracing my journey, I mean, it was difficult to readjust. Technology was different. Cell phones, GPS, internet hadn't been created. Cities and towns looked different. Culture was different. So collectively, those 3 elements made it feel like I was in a parallel world, one that I didn't belong in. My family had become strangers to me. The overwhelming majority had never come to see me. The few that did, it was very sporadic with many years in between. So they essentially became strangers. I was always, passed over for gainful employment. It felt like all the managers and business owners wanted somebody that could hit the ground running rather than a little bit of patience on the job training. I had to deal with the psychological after effects. I had to deal with the stigma. Yeah, you were in prison for 16 years wrongfully, but you were there for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So, those are all significant obstacles. It was just lonely, but I feel like looking back on that and looking from there to now, because I've been home for 18 years, I think that going to see mental health professionals, I mean, I went 4 times a week for 6 years in terms of dealing with the after effects and then adjusting back to life. That was a big thing. I feel like the more that I learned technology, I set out just to try to learn one new thing a day, even if it was something minor. But the more that I learned technology-wise, the more tied into the world I felt, the less out of place that I felt. So that was another that was another aspect of it. I think the further on I went in terms of my educational pursuits, even not just the external doors that opened for me, that the extra credentials allowed me to be a more effective advocate, but the better I felt about myself as well. So it was the double effect of that, was important. And I think at some point, just being being comfortable in my skin, my own skin. I mean, there were times along the way before I arrived at that reality that, every now and then I would hear like a metaphorical voice or a doubt or, look, this is, what are you doing? This is stupid what you're doing. You falsely confessed to something and it cost you 16 years and now you're running around all over the place telling people about it. So that was part of, what I would deal. But then, I would stop and think it through and even talk with people. No, I'm doing a lot of good, when it comes to that. And then also even into myself. I mean, aside from fighting for changes and using the story for that, to illustrate the need for systemic changes, but also it being healing and cathartic, so that was another part of it. And after my first week home, I realized, I uh, being angry about this, this is destroying me. I realized that after my first week. Look, this is destroying me. So, I can't be angry anymore. I need to, because look, I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. If I was to be angry or bitter, I mean, I would really be, it's not like I'm harming people that had a hand in what happened to me. I'm really the only loser in that scenario. And, I realize I've lost so much already as is. Why would I want to, in effect, give over the rest of my life? And, the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take the energy that I feel and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. I look at my life in a kaleidoscopic type of way, and I think that I went through what I went through in order to do the work that I'm doing now. I feel so I have my sense of purpose in the world, and with that, I have an inner peace. So I feel like I'm in a really good place, and I think finally having more time free than what I had in prison. I've been home 18 years. I did the 16. I feel like that's had somewhat of a balancing as well.
We are proud of
Well,
you, Jeffrey. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I see Brenda.
yes.
What are your thoughts, Brenda? What are your thoughts?
I just um, put my social work hat on. I worked with kids that were incarcerated, but for, not for wrong reasons, wrongful, as happened with you. And I just think about the amount of impact that has on them, the way they see themselves, like you mentioned, the way they relate to other people, the voices that they hear. And I just, huge, huge kudos to you for doing the therapy, for taking the steps, for, like, we have choices. Like, I'm a big believer. Like I said, we co-led a faith community for a couple of decades. I'm really a believer in there's something bigger than us, there's some purposes beyond. I don't think for a minute that was done to you so that you could be a better advocate. I just think that was just crappy that happened. Having said that, I feel like we get choices around what we're going to do with the crap that lands on our doorstep some days. And it just seems to me that you have made a whole series of very significantly impactful decisions that have brought you freedom and brought you life again. And I really honor that, and I'm grateful to even hear the story. I think it's very, very just encouraging. And so I say thank you for sharing that,
Yes, well, thank you both. Thank you both for your stories. I think this was really inspiring. And I think this is a wrap, Asher. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah,
I
no,
do want to talk to both of you after this. Brenda, Jeffrey, please, we have to stay in contact. Specific subjects with both of you.
Sure.
Mm. I would have you think about this, Jeffrey and Brenda, because I was thinking about when you were sharing that, Jeffrey. So, they were saying that like a poker player in Vegas, right? You go there, they say some of the best poker players are not the one that are given the greatest hand, but the one that are given a poor hand and end up winning still with that poor hand, right? Because those are the great ones. And even though you was given a poor hand in the beginning, but I'm looking at your life and the way you've traversed over time, and you just really turn that hand into something winning. And I see you winning right now based on your story, based on your journey right now. So even though
Yeah.
we're talking about failure today, oh my God, that was a massive failure, but now you triumph over that thing big time because now you have so much energy, so much passion, so much focus on the thing that you really want to affect in the world. And I see you had a lot of value just based on what you're talking about just now. So
Yeah.
I definitely congratulate and appreciate you for that.
Yeah.
Means a lot. Thank you all. That means those words of encouragement all, that all counts. It all means a lot. And sometimes, the journey is long, it's hard, sometimes it's lonely, but words of encouragement, words of meaning, just make the traveler stronger for the continue on.
Oh yeah.
And you know
Yeah.
what? I want to thank you both for each of you are bringing back your client's life. You're bringing back their life in different ways, right? But
Yes,
you're both doing a great work. So thank you. And thank you for sharing it with us.
sure.
Welcome. You're welcome. Yeah.
And I know Brenda, you gotta hit the road soon because I know you got your appointment. So we're gonna wrap up real quick. So a few closing questions, if you don't mind. Some of your biggest takeaway from this conversation, Brenda, if you don't mind sharing that. What some of your biggest takeaways?
I think biggest takeaway is that no matter what kind of situation you're in, that doesn't have to be the end story. Like without being all kind of like, oh, eternal optimist who can never see that there's challenges. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying sometimes things happen that are very challenging. That does not have to be all that our life is. How we handle it. There's a quote, and I'm super bad at quotes. It was Viktor Frankl, okay, when he was in one of the
The concentration camp.
Yes, concentration camp, and talked something to the effect that even when you have no choice around what is happening to you, you always have a choice in how you respond to it, whether that's like physical illness or incarceration or whatever it might be. I guess my takeaway is that does not have to be what defines your life. Those external things. What can you do in response to those? That's the last thing you have control over. That can never be taken away from you. Even incarcerated or sick in a hospital or whatever is your responses to those situations. And that's my huge takeaway from what I heard Jeffrey say today and what reminded me about me. Like, oh yeah, so yeah.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And I realized that DNA piece that you guys have in common too. So I noticed that as well. So that was definitely a synchronicity piece. But yeah, Jeffrey, same question for you. I know you this is that massive catalyst you have as far as setting folks free from those that are not founded in the places they need to be. So definitely talk about your biggest takeaway.
My biggest takeaway is, have a goal, have a realistic plan, right? You should be able to look at your plan 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, well, yeah, I could see how that might work, because who wants to carry out a plan that you don't think it was going to work? Be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan is not the goal. So don't be afraid to modify along the way in terms of the route. Work really hard. Like I don't believe that things are going to be okay just because. I don't believe in a pie in the sky. I think you have to work really, really hard to put yourself in a position for a miracle to happen, or the right door to open for you, where you meet the right person. No excuses. There might be reasons why something is more difficult, but no reason why you can't accomplish it. You just have to want it enough. You have to really just, in sports terms, leave it all out in the field. And never ever give up. And when you can't go forward, and I use this myself, when you can't go forward anymore, I just say to myself, look, I even though I can't go move ahead anymore, this might be the key moment. I might have been on the verge of a breakthrough. And so even though I can't keep going, I'm going to go through anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. And then once you cross that metaphorical bridge, you have to reach your hand back and pull somebody else over in that same position. And, I've been blessed to meet inspirational people in the course of my 18 years of freedom. I've seen people apply that are, family members of homicide victims. I've seen women who've been victims of domestic abuse. I've seen people who've been sexually trafficked. Many different, I've seen people that used to be homeless. I've seen people that more on the wrong life path as youth, and now they're diverting at-risk youth. So I know that that formula is universal. It's not limited to wrongful conviction. It can apply to any scenario.
If people trying to reach you, what's the best way to reach you?
Sure. So I have a website, www.deskovic.org. There's a web form there, but I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook, Jeffrey Deskovic, and the organization has a Facebook page also. It's in the, upper, for you guys, the upper right-hand corner, Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation. And we're also on Instagram as well, Deskovic Foundation. So all of those platforms have the messaging a capability, and I see the messages and I answer to people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Brenda, how can folks reach if they need to reach you?
Same thing, social media and website. The company name is In Balance LM. LM stands for Lifestyle Management. So inbalancelm.com. You can go to the website, you can click for a free 20-minute wellness roadmap call. We can just look at where you currently are, where you want to go. Imbalance LM on Instagram and on Facebook as well. And Jeffrey, I appreciate getting contacts, and I actually answer them. So happy to hear and hopefully move people a little bit along on their journey for wellness. So yeah.
So Brenda, when they make the appointment for that free call, it's actually with you, or you have an assistant?
It's with me. You get me live and live, and we just will chat about whether or not, like, where you are wellness wise, body, mind, spirit, where you're looking moving forward, and whether or not some epigenetic work might be helpful. So whether it might be wise to go get your DNA tested somewhere and come back to me with the raw data, and we can look at it as to how we might be able to get different systems in your body working a little bit better. So that's, I work without DNA as well too, but once you know DNA, it's kind of like wellness on steroids, and it's really fun doing that. So
great. Thank you both.
Okay.
Any last word, Lav?
I just thank you for bringing this awesome guest, and thank you both for sharing your stories and for the help and the work you do. And yeah, we keep in touch. We have to talk after this.
Right, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're tuning
for
to
having
Rose
me.
Awareness Podcast. Yes.
Good.
A place where we collect stories and circulate life-changing wisdom. Just for you guys who are watching right now, tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a couple of my inspiring mentors and so forth and so on, we're putting together a sleep wellness event at 7:30 in Zoom. So sleep been a challenge for me, so I'm working on it myself because I was in the military for 22 years. I have a lot of issues with my sleep, so I'm working on that right now, get my sleep back, because I need to get 6 hours at least. I need to get to 6 hours by the end of this year, because it's been a challenge for me. I'm only getting like 3 to 4 or 5 hours a night sometimes. It's a fluctuation between, but I'm working my way back there, because I realize how important sleep is. So if you guys can check us out, you're watching, if you want to check it out, definitely I'll put a link in the chat as well, so you guys can come there and come hang out with us tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And with that, folks, make it an awesome day.